Just like grade school, nobody gets in the front seat.
Good afternoon.
Except the hard.
I am so pleased to welcome you to this afternoon's celebration and look back to 50 years of excellent service to the people of the Western District of Washington by the Federal Defender's Office. My name is Johanna Hartwig, and I am the Executive Director of the Ninth Judicial Circuit Historical Society. And I wish to make this welcome on behalf of myself and our other organization sponsoring this great event, the M. Margaret McEwen Federal Bar Association. So thank you so much for being here. I'm just going to take 1 second to tell you about the NJCHS. We are an organization that covers the whole Ninth Circuit. We show up frequently here because we have such incredible partners within the Western District putting on amazing programming. You can find out more about us at njchs.org. We put on programs like this. All of our programs are streamed and recorded. So if you can't make something, you are welcome to look at it afterwards. We collect oral histories of judges and prominent attorneys from around the circuit. And I have to tell you that I recently was watching Judge Lasnik's oral history that we have. And I even learned some things about him that I did not know that were quite enlightening and entertaining. So
Please go further.
yeah. And then we have an excellent journal called Western Legal History that's put out once a year. And our editor-in-chief is a senior circuit judge, Michael Daly Hawkins. So I invite you to learn more about our society. But now let's turn to the afternoon at hand so that we can hear from our esteemed panel and our wonderful moderator. And we are so fortunate to have Chief Judge Estudillo, who I know from the perspective of the society is so incredibly welcoming of putting on programming in the district here that was so appreciated by our society members. And I'm so pleased to welcome him to the microphone to kick off our celebration.
All right, hey, thank you. All right, so let's start off with some stories about Judge Lasnik, if you all want to. No, just joking. Hey, welcome everyone on behalf of the Western District of Washington to today's programming. We're here to celebrate 50 years of excellence on behalf of the district and on behalf in particular of the clients that are represented who are before the district. So it is a great day to celebrate, although of course there is things looming in the background that we're all unfortunately aware of with regard to shutdown and whatnot that affects some of the services. But again, thank you for being here today to celebrate with us on this day. The Federal Public Defender for the Western District of Washington was opened in Seattle in the spring of 1975 and was under the leadership at that point of Erwin Schwartz. And there have been 3 federal defenders since that time, or since Erwin Schwartz, and they are here today with us. So we have Tom Helier, Michael Filipovic, and Colin Feynman. The district is honored by their presence, and we are excited to hear from them today and their thoughts about the past 50 years. Obviously, we have our moderator here today, Judge Lasnik, who needs no introduction. And we want to thank you, of course, for moderating. Also, we want to thank the Ninth Judicial Circuit Historical Society and, of course, its executive director, who you just met, Johanna. Also, the M3 Federal Bar Association for co-sponsoring today's presentation. And of course, I want to thank all those individuals who helped coordinate and plan today's programming. Lastly, I think I have with us a guest that I want to introduce and acknowledge, a visitor who is here with us today. From the Northern District of Illinois, we have Senior District Judge Joan Lefkow. And so she's here in the front with us, and welcome. We hope you enjoy Seattle over the next couple of days. Briefly, the Criminal Justice Act, 18 U.S.C. 3006A, enforces the Sixth Amendment right to counsel in criminal proceedings by requiring district courts to appoint counsel for all indigent defendants. Appointment of counsel occurs through a combination of attorneys employed by the Federal Public Defender's Office and through retention of private attorneys, otherwise known as CJA panel counsel or attorneys. The current government shutdown, as well as past lack of funding, is seriously testing the Criminal Justice Act and the rights guaranteed by the Sixth Amendment. This is particularly true for the dedicated CJA panel attorneys who continue to represent clients and take on new clients in the face of a lapse of funding that began back on July 3rd of this year. And although I acknowledge my comments are nothing more than words that are incapable of solving the problems that we're facing with regard to funding, I do want to thank all of the attorneys and staff who work in the Federal Defender's Office and CJA panel attorneys as well, who day in and day out continue to represent their clients with intellectual vigor, dedication, and passion for the work that they perform. The work that they perform has true meaning, not just for the individual clients who they represent in this district, but also for each one of us. Every day, they put the government to the test to ensure that it is meeting its obligations under the Constitution and the law so that criminal prosecutions are done in a fair and just manner. Their work guarantees that should any of us have the misfortune to be subject of a criminal prosecution, which nowadays, who knows, the government will be required to play fair. Thank you again to all of you for the work that you do. We appreciate it. And we sincerely believe in the work that you do to help the district. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Coriendo. And Coriendo, I think, is going to give a little bit more of an introduction of our panelists, including Judge Lasnik, right? Yeah.
Well, I will start with Judge Lasnik, and I think he and so many other members of the bench have been really instrumental in helping our office along, valuing the work we do, and really welcoming the zealous advocacy. Sometimes it can feel like we are a thorn in the side of judges, but then we have so many of you here this afternoon, and that support for the work is greatly appreciated. Judge Lasnik and I have known each other a long time at this point, but one of my very first clients in front of Judge Lasnik got up at a sentencing allocution and said, well, Corey says you're her favorite judge, and here's why. And ever since then, we've had a special connection. So,
You can only imagine Corey's.
yeah, I'm actually blushing now telling this story, but it is a true story, and I'm saying it a little preemptively because I was afraid Judge Lasnik might share it again. So, as Chief Judge Estudillo said, there have been 4 stewards of this organization. Erwin Schwartz could not be here today. He lives in Las Vegas now, but he wrote some words that we will share with everyone. And I think Tom has a copy and we'll share them as well. He clearly built the skeleton of this organization. Tom, in my view, was really the heart and the muscle behind it. And for more than 3 decades, led us through so many different eras. I was looking at our staff now, and I think more than 20 people who still work at the Federal Defender Office were hired by Tom. So more than 1/3 of our staff are Tom legacies, myself included, Mike and Colin as well. And it's so wonderful to be here today to see familiar faces and other people who have been through the office. Jennifer and Jay are right in front of me, but also Tom hires, I'm assuming, yes. And, Tom, when Chief Judge Estudillo talks about the passion of the office, Tom was known around the country for throwing the sentencing guidelines around as he talked about the injustice that came with those, and it's continued on. It's an amazing legacy. And then Mike, who's there through much of Tom's tenure, really brought us into a modern era. No offense, Tom, who would sometimes show up with a notepad and put it on, I don't even remember what they're called, those machines, with the arm and the light, and that was how Tom liked to present his evidence. But Mike brought us into the modern era, doing away with as much paper as we could and building websites through the COVID era, which was incredibly stressful for everyone, figuring out how to continue our work when we were shut down and unable to see clients in person. And then Colin in the last 4 years has really taken that to the next level. We have been through the return to office and kind of navigating that, rebuilding our office in ways that are more equitable. So for those of you who weren't able to make it to the 50th anniversary party at our office, everyone who works there now has an exterior space, access to natural light, which was something that that Colin worked hard in doing and making sure that we were as equitable a workplace as possible. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Judge Lasnik, who's going to tell more stories and hopefully amuse us all afternoon.
Thank you so much, Tori.
I'm supposed to take this back. Let me start out by saying how happy I am to have Judge Lefkoe here. She's a wonderful person. She clerked with Dave Buki on the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals way back. And thanks, Tony.
Yeah, I'm not so bad.
Not so bad, right? But anyway, it's great to have Judge Lefkoe here as our guest. And I told her I was doing this and she wanted to be here. She has been a trial judge for a long time in the Northern District of Illinois and a great friend to me. And it's wonderful to have her here. I also bring greetings from the Chief Circuit Judge, Mary Murguia, who I talked to a couple of days ago. And she said, please convey my personal appreciation to each of the defender, present and past, and to the entire office, which has an absolute glowing national reputation. And that is the truth. As someone who was on the Judicial Conference for a number of years and part of the executive committee, the Western District of Washington Federal Defender Office has a fabulous reputation. And I also talked to Chief Judge Murguia about the process to replace Colin Feynman, who has indicated he's not seeking another 4-year term. And we didn't go into a great deal of detail about it, but she assured me that it would end up in a good, in a good resolution. So Freudian slip. So what can you say about the 50 years of the Federal Defender Agency? Tom was there shortly after it started, or
I was on the original staff.
on the original staff in 1975, and stayed for 32 years. So his suggestion to me was, whenever I ask a question, he gets 32 minutes, Mike gets 8 minutes, and Colin gets 3.5. I'll round up to 4 minutes to answer, but I'm not going to enforce that rule. But Tom, when you and Erwin started this, you could count the number of attorneys on one hand, right?
That's right. There were exactly 4 of us. So it was a lot different than it is today. Is this on? Okay. Yeah.
Get closer.
Okay.
Yeah, you want to be like a DJ.
Get some feedback going here. Yes, it was a real small office. Erwin Schwartz began it, and I would disagree with Corey on he built a skeleton. He built the foundation for the office. Erwin was one of the great lawyers that this district have ever seen. Against probably what would be my wishes these days, he came to become the federal public defender from the U.S. Attorney's Office, and where he was the executive assistant to then U.S. Attorney Stan Pitkin. And when he opened the office in 1975, I was 27 years old. He was 25. He was the youngest member of our staff. Somehow he leapfrogged a few grades as he was going from first through law school, and that brilliance was a part of why it was that he was selected, I'm sure. But more than anything else, he was admired by judges for his honesty and their ability to take his word when he said something. And
Now, why would you say you wouldn't select somebody from a prosecution background? I mean, Colin was a prosecutor. I mean, is it,
well, that's true. I mean,
you don't like New
I
York?
don't think that was supposed to be shared in public, Judge. I mean.
it wasn't on his resume. Let's put it that way. No, it's funny because when Erwin interviewed me at the end, he asked if I had any questions, and I said, yeah, two. First of all, what makes you think you can do this job as an ex-prosecutor? And second, what are my chances? And probably I figured my chances were nil after the first question. But no, that was a bias that was short-lived because of the quality of the government's office here, the U.S. Attorney's office here. And I think one theme that we'll hear a lot about is a level of collegiality and respect that exists in this district that's, from my experience in touring the country, nearly unknown in other places.
And you're not just talking about U.S. attorneys there, you're talking about district and magistrate judges too.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, Your Honor. Yeah, you're going to hear it again and again. We have a unique relationship with our court. The judges here genuinely appreciate what we do, and that's not everywhere. I mean, in some districts, when the Criminal Justice Act just kind of kicked in at the beginning, there were districts that said, no way, we're not going to have a federal public defender. They wanted to rule the roost, which meant pick the lawyers that were going to take particular cases and that sort of stuff. So our judges have always been of a different ilk, for sure.
And that started with Chief Judge Beeks,
Yes.
who some of you who have saw Jack Hammond talk about what happened in Fort Lawton in World War II. Judge Beeks was the defense attorney for those African-American soldiers who were wrongly accused of lynching an Italian prisoner of war. And Judge Beeks was on the defense side. On the prosecutor's side was Leon Jaworski, who some of you know from Watergate. And Jaworski and the government hid exculpatory evidence. And it was only later on that Jack and Leslie Hammond found it, wrote a book about it on American soil that revealed the truth about what happened there. So Judge Beeks came from that background of seeing a government that wasn't playing fair and the need for defense counsel. And so he was a moving force behind starting the Federal Defender's Office, wasn't he?
Well, that's right. And in fact, I was going to talk about that for just a moment. And Erwin mentions it in his paper, and I really encourage you to be able to read it if you have a chance. Judge Beeks was a force to be reckoned with in this district. He's a real stern judge, to say the least. I didn't know anything about this background he had at Fort Lawton, and none of us really did because it hadn't been exposed for what it was yet. But Judge Beeks was recruited by the Army cadre to be one of two lawyers to represent 43 African-American defendants who were charged with crimes from capital murder to lesser included kind of things. The two of them representing 43 people at a trial during which, if that ain't enough, the government cheated in such a manifest way that in 2008, the United States Army exonerated and acquitted all of them. So he came into this situation from that perspective, recognizing that the deck was stacked and that there were times when the government didn't play fair. And he was insistent as chief judge then that we get a federal public defender in this district when and if that opportunity came.
And that was not the end of the troubles for an independent federal defender agency when it came to interference from Washington, D.C., administrative office, et cetera. And there were times when other judges had to step in and keep this independent and fair.
That's true. I mean, the whole notion of the independence of the federal public defender is an issue that has percolated for decades and still does, but has been ameliorated through time in massive ways. But at the beginning, district court judges sort of did the appointment and really were almost an arm of the federal defender's office, which in a lot of districts was not necessarily a good thing. And that interference with our independence has been a sticking point and resulted in ad hoc committees created by the chief justices of the Supreme Court to look at it and to investigate it and to make recommendations. And Erwin Schwartz talks about in his note here about our judges when we were confronted with some sort of idea that a case was not going to be fully funded, would step in and go to the administrative office and to the judicial conference and saying, no, that's not going to happen. And Judge McGovern, Judge Lasnik, who was on sort of the governing council of the federal courts, was in the midst of this fray during a big period of time of struggle. And he and I had conversations that were not private because you could probably hear all throughout the courthouse as we were talking about some of these things. And I can remember Judge Lasnik in his typical diplomatic way, without offending or naming or saying anything wrong about anybody, would just say, Tom, some of these guys are more conservative than I am.
Yeah, that was during sequestration, which was the government shutdown that we were able to control when I was on the executive committee. But I was reviewing some of those emails between Tom and me and Mike, who was about to take over, not right away, but shortly in there. And, when I was on the executive committee, we had never had a federal defender appear at an executive committee meeting of the judicial conference. And I talked to Tom, and we got Ruben Khan from San Diego out and another.
Mike Knack.
Yeah. And for the, judges like Merrick Garland, myself, Bill Traxler, it was really important to hear from federal defenders. And we came through, said no to the bean counters, and implemented what the defender agencies needed for a budget. And that's part of what you don't see. You think of defenders only as fighting in the courts and fighting for people, but there's a lot of administrative work that needs to be done that Tom was good at once he calmed down, and Mike was always good at, because he was always calm. And Colin, you've been dealing with some of this with the CJA lawyers now too?
Yes, administration is a huge part of the job. And when it comes to the CJA panel, the hardships that they're experiencing right now, they've been in essentially a non-pay status since July 7th. We were just on day 22, well, a little bit shorter for us because there were some funds left in the judiciary. It's a crisis not only for them, many of them are sole practitioners, and they're putting on case-related expenses on credit cards. I mean, they're completely dedicated to the mission, but there's only so much they can do to sustain themselves in their practice under these circumstances. And I've talked to Judge Estudillo about this. I mean, we are close to the point where we may not have enough panel attorneys to represent clients on multi-defendant cases. And so the administrative part of this, the budget part of it, quickly develops into a potential constitutional crisis. And that's the kind of circumstances we're dealing with right now. Obviously, my entire office is in an unpaid status. We're accepted because the work is essential. But it can be somewhat demoralizing, and I think particularly hard on the panel attorneys, because at least we have an office, we have a community that's there every day. A lot of the panel attorneys are working, like I said, as sole practitioners. And we really try to keep the panel supported and up to date, but it's a really difficult time.
Is this one of the reasons you decided not to seek reappointment, that you'd rather just be trying cases than dealing with government bureaucracy?
Well, first of all, I've been at the office going on 24 years, so almost half of this legacy. So, the 4 years serving as defender, I consider the greatest honor and kind of crowning achievement of my career. But in large part, yes. I think the job has changed somewhat post-COVID, and there are a lot of challenges with return to work. We've been in a hiring freeze for 19 of the last 25 months. We're understaffed. People are not getting paid. So it's not that sustaining the office from a management or administrative standpoint isn't very rewarding. But at the same time, it has consumed really more time than I expected under these circumstances. And I have not been in court as much as I had hoped to with this job. So, those are my personal reasons. But it's going to be a challenge for whoever takes on this job in the future, because I don't think these circumstances are changing anytime soon.
And Mike, I always say one of the keys to my success as chief judge of this district is you have to be following someone who everyone's so happy to be rid of. And that was Judge Kuhnauer, for my sake. But taking over for Tom Hillier after 32 years, how did you decide to do that? He's a tough act to follow.
Yeah, he's an incredibly tough act to follow. And I think I just made a decision. I can't beat Tom. So I just took the job and did it my way, so to speak. But I was very fortunate. I'd been in the office since 1990. Knew everybody really well, knew all the players. And it was just being an assistant federal defender in many ways for a defense lawyer is a dream job. I originally came from Chicago, where I went to law school, practiced there for 2 or 3 years in a small town as an appellate defender. Had to make a decision. Do I go and be a public defender there, or do I want to go to the West Coast? And I thought, Chicago, Seattle, Portland, San Francisco. And the real thing that drove me away from Chicago at that time, and this was just before the big Graylord scandal hit, was the Cook County Public Defender at that time was controlled by the Democratic Party. And you had to essentially know your alderman or a precinct captain to become a lawyer in that office. And much of the circuit court bench at that time were all graduates from one law school, the DePaul Law School, which was Mayor Daley's law school. And I think, Judge Lefkoe, you probably know this history very well. But Chicago was an exciting place to be a defense lawyer. I was an intern and at the law school I was with a defense project, worked for a great set of lawyers, one of whom ended up becoming a judge here, Holly Hill, and a lawyer by the name of Michael Deutsch, and really instilled in me this passion. In fact, one of the first cases I worked on, we had an innocent client charged with murder.
That was your last innocent client,
Yeah,
wasn't
that
it?
may have been my last innocent client, but so that really got me jazzed up. But the point, bringing it back to the federal defender's office and following Tom, I had a lot of great mentors who had very different styles. Bob Berukowitz, Gus Augustinelli in Illinois, who was a former tunnel rat in Vietnam, and they're all different, diverse, personalities, and they taught me many skills. But one was, don't be like Berukowitz, don't be like Tom. Just try to follow your own path. And
So one of the things that you did, and Corey touched on this a little bit, is you brought the office into a sort of the next generation, using investigators, social workers, things like that. How did you manage that transition?
well, we'd always had investigators, always had a number of terrific investigators. I think it was under Tom when we got our first social worker, but we really beefed that part of the practice up. The technology part, and even that started under Tom. Tom gets a lot of grief about being not technologically savvy, but he was very supportive of the need to get us up to speed. And right before, in the last year of Tom being there, and then in the time leading up to COVID, we really put a huge amount of energy into our technology and our infrastructure there. And when COVID hit, I mean, we were up and running seamlessly from home, like within a day or two, and really kind of ahead of the other parts of the people in the district. I
Yeah,
thought.
that was an amazing success. And one of the things that Corey also talked about is Tom's hatred of sentencing guidelines. Now, you know what, when I saw him at this National Defenders Conference in Seattle, when I was chief judge, he invited me to address the people, and I was very honored to do so. And Tom was, you know, picked up that guidelines and threw it against the wall. The guidelines were smaller in those days, and Tom was stronger. So I don't know that he could do it now because the guideline. But after he did that, I went out into the hallway, went to the restroom, and a couple of defenders from southern states came up to me and said, Judge Lasnik, if we didn't have the guidelines to restrict our judges, our people would be going to prison for much longer than they are now. So it shows the difference from place to place. But one of the things that changed in the defender's office is, Tom, when you joined, and in your first decade or so, there were a lot of trials, right?
Yes, absolutely. And that, that is a guideline fallout. But yeah, I mean, my first, I came from the Spokane Public Defender's Office, where I was trying cases like real public defenders do. And it was the same here. I mean, I had a half a dozen full-blown major trials my first year. And, we went fiscal years since where we had maybe 2 trials in the whole office. So it was way good fun back in those days. And of course, sentencing was discretionary. So you didn't have the trial penalties and that sort of stuff. It was, yeah. So the guidelines had, I sympathize with those folks from the South, but at the same time, I'll go to the grave view is the guidelines are not a good thing. Imprisonment skyrocketed as a result of the guidelines, and they've done enormous harm. On the other side, Congress stepped in there for quite a while, for a little while anyway, and started to modifying some of our laws to not only lessen the impact of mandatory minimums, but give people the opportunity through safety valves or other methods to mitigate the punishments that they receive. But yeah, I mean, clients that didn't used to go to prison were getting ripped out of the community because of those guidelines and thrown in jail. One of the things that the Sentencing Commission, in creating average sentencing periods of time, they said, well, we took all of these stats for bank robbery, and then we added them up and said, okay, here's the average sentence. What they didn't do, which was happening in 1/3 of the cases in federal courts at that point in time, was calculate probationary sentences. So what you had was a guideline that was skewed hugely on the side of putting people in prison for offenses which never used to require that, even if it was, as they would say, only 6 months or 9 months.
And Mike, what would you say was the biggest change in the business for you during your 8 years? Was there any legislative change or guideline change or change in U.S. attorney policy that affected the federal defenders?
Well, I think one of the big things was the First Step Act and the Compassionate Release Program, the legislation that was passed that allowed people to bring up a motion to the sentencing judge after they were serving their prison sentence to reduce the sentence, either for a variety of reasons, many related to health or related to exceptional rehabilitation while in prison. And I think the last couple of years I was at the office, we filed a large number of those and were successful in a large number of those compassionate release cases, and were able to get people out of prison who were doing decades-long sentences and who were probably never going to see the light of day. And the judges here were very receptive to those motions, including Judge Lasnik. There's one individual that I represented who he granted compassionate release to, and I see him once a month and take him grocery shopping. He's like 76 years old, and he's in very poor health, and he would have never gotten out of prison ever if Judge Lasnik hadn't granted that motion. And he's been out almost 3 years now. So
Keeping our fingers crossed. How about you, Colin? You came in during COVID, but not at the very beginning of COVID, and then you emerged from COVID. What was the biggest change for you so far?
Well, I think it's true of, a lot of institutions and employers is that, post-COVID, there was a great retirement. There was a lot of change. We made a conscious effort to really try and diversify our applicant pool, and that included lowering some of the, traditional barriers to experience levels to join the office. We're not a teaching office, but we can certainly mentor people. And so, we've had a whole new sort of set of perspectives that join the office, which is, really, really valuable. And I think that kind of change is important. But, there are a lot of people like me who have also been there for a long time. So I think there's a real emerging and even better culture in the office now with those changes. And just to turn back to one thing, in terms of like the sentencing guidelines, those becoming discretionary was absolutely key in terms of bringing more fairness or at least discretion back to judges in the sentencing process. But to me, the remaining sort of root evils of what are distorting the system are mandatory minimums, which of course give the prosecutors so much leverage, and appeal waivers, which since we have so few trials, are routinely part of plea agreements, and I think are really hindering the development of the law. So, if there are a couple of things that I could see change institutionally that I think would be the big breakthrough, it would be in those two areas.
When I got to the federal courts, I thought to myself, the prosecutors are all interested in getting a conviction, whether it's a guilty plea or a trial, but they don't fight as hard at the sentencing. Whereas defenders are focused really on the end result for their client and spend a great deal more time advocating for a fair sentence or a just sentence, with the prosecutors sometimes getting up and saying, well, if Your Honor doesn't have any questions, we'll stand on the brief, which drives me nuts, So
Well,
you train?
we like that.
Yeah, I know. but you put an emphasis.
And
on
it may sound at the moment as if it's sort of cursory or not taking the process seriously. I mean, what I see often happening in that situation is a prosecutor who is perhaps sympathetic to the arguments that are being made. And, it's a tricky role because as a prosecutor, you have institutional demands and you have DOJ sending down mandates. But you have a lot of people, which is one of the great things about the U.S. Attorney's Office here traditionally with a conscience and a real sense of fairness. So I think a lot of the time when you hear a prosecutor say that, it's not because they don't care, but actually because they do, and they're navigating some of the challenges that they have in terms of handling their cases.
Good point. Good point. Now, anyone who has met Tom Hilyar's lovely wife, Stephanie, knows he has an eye for talent, both in marriage and in hiring people for the office. But Tom, what did you look for that enabled, not for a wife, but for, you really hired some great people.
Well, thank you for saying that, Judge. I am fortunate that the office was a bit of a magnet back in those days. Seattle was kind of this whole notion of, people were starting to go out and, win the war and all those things. So we just attracted a lot of good people. And Bob Barukowitz, who ran the public defender's office here, had great talent. I called him the manager of my farm team, which I stole all sorts of lawyers from his office. But what I looked for was, people. Well, first of all, smart's really important. So smart was big on it for sure. But smart's, all of us are smart, right? So, but heart was huge, and so I wanted that, and I wanted some evidence that this person, anecdotally or otherwise, was dedicated to the mission that we have. and kindness also. People had to be kind. I mean, I think it's important that you get along. Our office, with respect to your honor saying, how did you inherit Tom's office? It was a mess, you know. It was a food fight. My management technique was taken from. Some people know here that I had a favorite band. It's called the Grateful Dead, and they kind of a free form outfit. And that was my office, you know, sort of free form. You know, my only policy is that there will be no policies. And but so you had to get along. And so being kind and being smart and having heart and dedication, those were what we look for. And luckily there was a wealth of candidates who, many of whom are here and populating this, this event today. And if I could, I took some notes and wrote down some names, and some people that aren't here, for example, are Kate Flommer, who was the U.S. attorney here for a while, Rob Owen, who went off to start the Texas Death Penalty Resource Center, and then to Northwestern, where he did the same thing in Chicago and Illinois. Omodari Jupiter, who sent us an application with writing samples that didn't have any case citations. So he was immediately on my good list. And it's currently he became the federal defender in the Virgin Islands, and then to Mississippi, where he was from, the Deep South. Laura Mate, who I brought on to help me with policy work and sentencing work, became Sentencing Resource Counsel with us, and then is now co-chair of the United States Sentencing Commission. Jeff Robinson, who's a rock star basically, who has started has directed Who We Are film that's out there in mainstream right now, Netflix, and his running mate, Song Richardson, who was also very deeply involved in racial impacts of the criminal justice system, is the president of Colorado College, which is like the best liberal arts college.
She moved on to somewhere else.
She was in DePaul as a law professor, became the dean of the University of Cal at Irvine Law School, and now is the president of Colorado College. Tiffany Cartwright, who only had about a sip of our coffee during her brief time here, but it's enough to poison her. And she's now on our bench here in the Western District of Washington. Brian Tushita, one of our great magistrate judges. And the list goes on. And there are so many warriors in this community and others that fit that bill, but are doing the work here. Jay Stansel, who we recruited from immigration at a point in time, and we thought this may become an issue in the criminal justice system. And he and Jennifer Wellman brought a case to the United States Supreme Court, Zedvitas and Ma, which resulted in declaration by our Supreme Court back when that indefinite detention of immigrants was unconstitutional, and literally thousands of people were freed within days after that decision came down. So,
and Jay, could you remind me who the trial judge was on that case?
but if I could interrupt on that, this is one of the, I mean, he was one of the trial judges, but this is one of the great innovations of this district and the cooperation we have with our court. We saw these people, because we have an immigration detention center here, that are being indefinitely detained because they've been convicted of a deportable offense and they've been ordered deported, but their country did not have repatriation treaties with the United States. So places like Laos or Cambodia or Russia or other places, these people couldn't get out of immigration because they couldn't be deported. So they were just indefinitely detained. And they weren't our typical client, but we picked them up, even though they weren't charged criminally in this district, by just going to our court and our magistrate judges and saying, this sort of sucks, and we'd like to figure out how to do it. They said, go for it, Tom. And we filed a habeas action on behalf of all of them. They certified it as a class action. And each one of our district judges took a case, and then they sat in bank in this district, all of our district court judges. First time, I think, in history of the United States, certainly of this district, where the court sat in bank and listened to arguments about this proposition and ruled that it was unconstitutional, which was upheld in the Ninth Circuit and ultimately upheld in the Supreme Court. And that's the sort of collaboration that exists here. you know, gives us hope, right? I mean, we'll leave this event today feeling pretty good for a while until we read the paper tomorrow morning, you know, but having some hope is helpful. And that's, you know, it's just an example
Yeah.
of what this
Mike,
district
you
did, you know.
looked like you wanted to say something about that.
Well, I think that was probably the single most significant case in the last 50 years.
Wow.
I can't really think of anything that was more impactful, both in terms of the legal determination and the number of people that were freed and continue to be released from custody. It just keeps going on. But the other thing I wanted to say was, you know, that accomplishment from our office and all the other accomplishments of, you know, being part of setting up the drug court, the dream court, you know, many other positive things that have come out of this office, it just would not have happened. And even with, if all of our lawyers and all of our investigators and all of our paralegals were somewhere in Missouri or in some other state, or even a relatively good district, I don't think these things would have been accomplished. I think it's really a testament to the judges in this district and the historical context of our judiciary, going back to Judge McGovern and then Judge Bolt and the decisions he made. You know, we were in the right place at the right time. You know, we really feel blessed, I think, all of us, to
Well,
have
very
had these
nice of you to
opportunities.
say. And how about a hand for the district judges and magistrates? That case that they're talking about, and Jay got to argue it in the U.S. Supreme Court, right? Kim Ho Ma was he had been born in Cambodia, but came over when he was like a year old. He didn't speak any Cambodian, didn't know anything about the culture, committed a serious crime as a juvenile, and was going to be deported, but Cambodia wouldn't take him, so he's in custody. And that was all five of us who had cases ruled the same way, not by getting together like you do on the circuit court, but ruling individually. But we all agreed that it violated the Constitution. But the government chose Jay's case, Kim Ho Ma, because it was the most serious conviction. And so they wanted to take it up that way. And Judge Reinhardt wrote for the Ninth Circuit. And I like to say, my decision was so good, even Judge Reinhardt got affirmed by the U.S. Supreme Court for affirming me. But when we did that oral argument in the old courthouse, you know, and I was a kid, I had just gotten to the court. So I was, you know, 48 years old, and sitting with some of my heroes, you know, like Bill Dwyer and Barbara Rothstein, Jack Kuhnauer and Tom Zilli. And during the oral argument, I asked the government's lawyer about each unharmful, gentle soul misplaced inside the jail. We gaze upon the chimes of freedom flashing. My first Bob Dylan quote in a case. And I could almost hear a gasp out there in the audience that, oh my God, we have a federal judge who's quoting Bob Dylan. We've really turned the page here. But, you know, we all shared the kinds of things Tom was talking about he looked for in people. Super intelligent people, but with compassion, with kindness, with respect for the people who appear in front of them. And it was Bill Dwyer was my mentor judge. Could you have a better mentor judge to teach you those things? And the district continues on with our new judges, you know, Judge King, Judge Evanson, Judge Lynn, Judge Estudillo, Judge Cartwright, Judge Chun, Judge Whitehead. You know, these are people who will carry that torch the same way for the next 35, 40 years. Now, let me say that if we did not have a federal defender's office and we were in the old system where the district judge got to appoint, I would appoint Pete Mazzone to all my cases because it's so much fun having my cousin Vinny in the courtroom. But Tom, I do remember when you invited me to meet the CJA panel lawyers, I looked around the room, the conference room we were in, and it was almost all white men How did you go about changing that? And Mike and Colin, how did you forward that to get more diversity in the CJA panel lawyers?
Well, I mean, I was aware of, the color of our office and wanted to change it. The recruiting pool wasn't as deep here as it is now. Yeah, I would call young lawyers that I'd seen working in other parts of the country and ask them if they wanted to come. But, I was just dipping my foot in that water compared to, when Mike's taking the office over in Colin. It's much more diverse than it was when I left it, not through anything other than, frustration on my part. And, I mean, I couldn't keep the Robinsons and Song Richardsons and Bill Lees and Michael Spearmans for more than a few years either, so folks came and went. But, we were, tuned into it in a big kind of way. And Mike can tell you how he just kicked it into a whole higher gear.
For the CJA panel specifically, I think what really helped was when we established the CJA Resource Council position, and Jen Kaplan took over, because she was really the driving force to recruiting more women attorneys to join the panel. I think a lot of lawyers who practice in state court as public defenders or as private lawyers are intimidated about the federal practice. So I think we saw a need to actually go out and recruit people and to encourage people to come on board. And then she created this mentorship program that has really been helpful. I'm mentoring a couple of lawyers right now. I'm doing just a few CJA cases myself through the mentorship program. So I think that was probably the most significant change. Because we've talked about that problem for years and years, and we would make incremental progress. But I really think her efforts really helped us turn the corner on that.
Good point. And Colin, how about you?
Well, it's really a matter of continuing a lot of the efforts that, honestly, Mike in particular started while he was there in terms of the recruitment. As I indicated, we've tried to lower some of the experiential barriers to joining the office. It's taken a long time for law schools to catch up in terms of diversifying their own student population. So there's a long lag time if you're waiting for attorneys to have 8 or 10 years of experience and looking for diverse applicants to really build up a pool. So I think that's been really good. I mean, one of our attorneys we hired actually had no trial experience at all. He came from the Electronic Frontier Foundation, NACTL's Fourth Amendment Project. Obviously very smart, obviously brought a lot to the table. But that probably would have been a disqualifier in different times. So definitely trying to make those kind of efforts. Right now with the panel, it is hard to sustain the panel, let alone recruit people to it when they are not getting, they're here and they're not getting paid. That makes it very difficult. But we do a lot of outreach, and the mentorship program that really started, under Mike getting going was a huge boon, because we can say, look, you don't need to be intimidated by federal practice. We're going to hold your hand through this process. You're not going to be taking cases on your own until you're ready. And the panel attorneys who do the mentoring work are just fabulous, because that's a lot of extra time than just putting in the casework. I just wanted to make one quick point about Zevetus, because it's still living with us very much today, and unfortunately in a way that's really unfortunate, because what we're seeing now is a lot of people who were released even 20 or more years ago as a result of that decision are getting rearrested by ICE. They're showing up for their check-ins. They haven't committed any new crimes. They have not failed to meet any of their check-in requirements, and they're getting arrested. We even had one arrest here by ICE agents in the courthouse. Fortunately, that seems to have not taken hold. And our office now, I think we have about 30 people that we've either filed petitions on or are preparing to file petitions on to get them re-released from custody. So, we're dealing with an administration that has no respect for the rule of law, and we're fighting in some respects the same battles over again. But of course, the big one was Cepeda. So we can go to court. We can say, in the petition, these people were released. Their circumstances haven't changed. They shouldn't have been redetained. Please, as quickly as possible, let's get them out of custody.
Yeah, very, very true. Now, one of the areas of discrimination besides race and gender is geography. The Tacoma office has had kind of a stepchild reputation. You're the first federal defender from the Tacoma office.
Really, I thought we were known as the cool office, but that's okay.
Yes, south of King County, you are. Yeah. But do you feel that having, we have our first chief judge from Tacoma, although we don't pick it based on geography, and you obviously weren't picked on the basis of geography, but do you feel like Tacoma gets enough attention?
Well, in terms of attention from the main office, I'm sure they're happy to have as little as possible, as we certainly appreciated it under Mike and Tom's tenure. We were able to do our own thing a little bit more, maybe, not that it was ever very restrictive to practice in the office at all, but we were fine with that. I think it's wonderful that we have a chief judge down in Tacoma. I have a real heartfelt tie to Tacoma. It's where I did practice for most of the years. And to me, it is a special place. If you haven't been down there, Judge Bryan, really saved the train station down there and was the architect in a lot of ways of that courthouse being what it is today. And it's a wonderful place to practice.
It's remarkable what Judge Bryan accomplished in that area. And, it was a place, it was a real train station for a long time. And it was a place where a lot of Japanese American citizens were sent to the internment camps. And, we've got a situation now with a president who issues executive orders that violate the Constitution, and they go to a US Supreme Court where he appointed a number of people. But that was the same thing back in World War II. We had a president who issued, I believe, a blatantly unconstitutional executive order on the Japanese internment, and it was upheld by a US Supreme Court that had a large number of his appointees on the court. So, sometimes we think these are things that never happened before, and they may be happening in numbers that never happened before. But what happened with the Japanese internment is an embarrassment to the United States legal system, in my opinion. But Robert Saka, how does he pronounce his name? Federal judge from California. Okay. He was a speaker at the opening of that courthouse and talked about his family being sent from there. And now it's a palace of justice, and how the United States can go from this to this, and hopefully we'll make that transition again. But what Judge Bryan accomplished in making that the U.S. courthouse down there, and it's a beautiful place. If you haven't visited, please do. And we have. I won't ask you for each of you for your Jack Tanner story, but oh yeah, I think I will. We all have our Jack Tanner stories, right, Richard? Yeah.
I can give you one thought about Jack Tanner, because there was a time when the Seattle office covered Tacoma early, when I started the first maybe 5 to 10 years, and we didn't have a Tacoma office. And I just have this distinct memory of every time I had a hearing before Judge Tanner, as I was driving down I-5, most lawyers would complain, that we don't want to go see Judge Tanner. He's going to really sentence my client to a long period of imprisonment. It's going to be very difficult. He's going to be hard on me. And I had a different approach. I said, this is going to be a great day, because something totally unexpected is going to happen, and I'm going to have to deal with this, and it's going to make for a great story later, and it'll be so much fun. And hopefully my clients, I actually did pretty well with Judge Tanner. I had a trial. He had a reputation in trials where the defense wanted to put on witnesses. He'd say, well, counsel, make an offer of proof. And if the offer of proof wasn't good enough, he would not let you call your witnesses. And then you'd have to go to the Ninth Circuit and do it all over again. But I had a trial with him once, and I had three witnesses. I had the girlfriend or the wife of the drug dealer, and I had a good chance in an acquittal. I needed these three witnesses on. I thought, how am I going to get him to let me call these witnesses? And I thought, aha, I promised him that I would get three witnesses on and off the witness stand in 45 minutes to an hour. And I told him, I guarantee it, Your Honor. He said, call your first witness. So you just had to have your knees very loose in that courtroom.
That's a great Judge Tanner story. Do you have one, Tom?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I love Judge Tanner. I agree with Mike. You had to put on the armor when you went down there. You never knew where the high fastball was going to head. But and he was hard on sentencing. But I had a trial down there with Andy Hamilton, as I recall, and it was a bank robbery, multiple counts. He gave us an offer, it's a guideline case, and I said, forget about it. This guy had been down for bank robbery several times, so at this point, he was in his mid-60s, and we won a couple of counts and got rid of the gun and a few others, and so Judge Tanner ended up giving him a sentence that was actually less than what the guidelines would have called for, but more importantly, he got to like my client during the period of the trial because he's an old guy and he just could have bonded with him. And he would laugh when he would see us fighting and the prosecutor and him fighting. And he got cancer while he was in the joint. And he got a prognosis of dying within a year. And he asked for compassionate release, and that's just denied, right? And that was that. So I called Andy and said, Danny's dying, Freeman Carter, and his son now, or his grandson, is the executive director of the Seattle Clemency Project, having taken over for John Zuloff. But in any event, I said, we got to get him out. They won't let him out. And I said, why don't we just do an amended judgment and sentence to time served? And he said, yeah, let's do that. So we did. We sent it over to his clerk, Greg, as everybody knew Greg, and Greg gave it to the judge and he signed it and he was out, within a couple of days, and he died, several weeks or several months later at home in Idaho with his family. So for every story that there is, there's a counterbalance with Jack Tanner, in my view, that fully outweighs all the other stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and you must have had an influence on Judge Tanner because Judge Burgess used to tell the story, how Judge Tanner would have his dog with him in chambers, and the dog went over to Judge Burgess's chambers and peed on the carpet. And Judge Burgess went storming into Tanner and said, your dog just peed on my carpet. And said, did you see him do it? How do you know it was my dog? So, Jack was picking up a little bit of that, no doubt. And if any of you went to Judge Tanner's retirement dinner, the speaker was San Francisco Mayor Willie Brown, right? Jack knew a lot of people.
Yeah.
One of my favorite Tanner stories is apparently he got into a fist fight with Thurgood Marshall. Not too many people talk about that. So but I think we should go through the audience and hear other Judge Tanner story. No, we won't do that now.
The only other thing I wanted to say about Judge Tanner was his memorial service was the most amazing memorial service I've ever been to. It was in the rotunda of the Tacoma Federal Courthouse, and judges from all over the circuit came for this. And it was really inspiring. It turned out to be a roast more than a memorial service, and everybody was, and the MC was the late Judge Burgess, who was just wonderful, deadpan. And it was probably one of my most memorable experiences in the district, that memorial service.
Very true. I have a picture from it in my chambers because it brings back such great memories. Yes. And Gary Gayton was one of the speakers. And yes, Judge Tanner was a UW Law at the same time as Carolyn Dimmick and Bill Dwyer. Yeah. Quite a class from that law school. So I think we should offer a couple of questions from the audience if they're out there. Do anybody want to ask a question? Yes, felt it out.
Came out of retirement to congratulate myself.
Hey, Michael. Mike.
Mike with the, yeah.
I wanted to point out that there was a client of yours that made judicial.
Say it again.
Judicial history.
Assam,
Oh, okay.
and when you stood up in front of the Judge Canal and sentenced against the tie, the Al-Qaeda operative that Tom represented, LA airport bomb, said it's a flat fact that the public benefited from his trial, but also his cooperation. So thank you, because that act, I mean, what public defender's offices in the country could say that they represented an Al-Qaeda operative who ended up cooperating? And so I wanted to come here and thank you for that. I didn't have a question, and I've got some great Jack Tanner stories.
Yeah. And you've got some great Mike Withy stories too, that we would love to hear at the right time. But the Rassam case, for those of you who don't remember, this was one of the people who was called the Millennial Bomber. He was arrested coming across from Victoria to Port Angeles on that ferry, right? The Black Ball ferry.
Right.
And it was a classic case of the right person being in the right position at the right time for the wrong reasons. Danny Clem was the Kitsap County prosecutor who, in a death penalty case where Jeff Robinson was representing the defendant, said in front of the trial judge and everyone during the case, turned to Jeff Robinson, who's African-American, and said, "Where did you learn your ethics? In Harlem?" And Jeff made a motion for prosecutorial misconduct. It was assigned to then Superior Court Judge Karen Strombaum, later magistrate judge. And she disqualified Clem, but not the office, from pursuing the case. Clem was defeated when he ran for re-election, moved to Port Angeles, and worked for the Clallam County prosecutor up there, and did something so awful that the Clallam County prosecutor lost his reelection. Clem was fired, and he became a Border Patrol agent and practiced his "I hate minorities" by stopping Arab-looking guys who drove off the ferry and searched the car, and ended up finding explosives that were going to be used to bomb the LA airport. Now, it gets assigned to Judge Kuhnauer, who decides to change the venue from Seattle to Los Angeles because everybody thought they were there to blow up the Space Needle at year 2000. And instead, it ended up being tried in LA, where that was the place they were going. But LA is a little bit bigger than Seattle, so they were able to get a fair jury. And I think Tom would be the first one to tell you that Judge Kuhnauer gave Rassam a totally fair trial and a very fair sentencing. And Judge Kuhnauer, was reversed once by the Ninth Circuit, reversed twice by the Ninth Circuit. And when I'm not being recorded, I'll tell you a great story about why he was not reversed a third time, thanks to Judge Lasnik and his law clerk. But that's for another time when we're not on the record. But you've got to argue in the U.S. Supreme Court on Rassam. I was going to ask each of you, what is your really all-time big case? Was that yours, Tom?
Well, it was a huge, as far as the trial is concerned, certainly a big deal. And we had other big cases. I think, I argued the Bagley case in the U.S. Supreme Court, which ended up to be a pretty important case. And I was about 12 years old at that point in time. And we didn't have moot courts or anything back in those days. My preparation was to go to DC a day early and watch arguments. And I did. I said, God, I could be better than that guy. And, you know, and it was just a terrific argument with a court that included people like Marshall and Brennan and others, you know, that and Justice Rehnquist. It was a burger court, and I got yelled out by Justice Berger at one point in time, Chief Justice Berger. But that was really thrilling for all the reasons that go with that. But probably mostly because my mom and dad were there, and, you know, they got paid back for an entire life of my, you know, badness, you know, by going, because they're patriots and, you know, great believers in the system. So just, you know, that kind of experience, these are the things that go beyond what, you know, our job is. But I kind of reiterate what Mike said a minute ago. I mean, people kind of say, God, too bad, you know, tried to become a lawyer and you had to be a public defender and da 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 da. You know, it's just the best job in the world. You know, I mean, it's not just what we do and what we have an opportunity to do and what people we meet, but yeah, you practice in a district like this, you have the kind of cases that we have. You have opportunities to travel and to meet people, and the list of things that that make me smile when I think about my office is it would take more than the 3 hours to read. So yeah, that was a big case for me for those reasons. Rassam was big for different reasons, but it was incredibly important for the reason that Mike Withey just mentioned. You don't see people decide to cooperate against Al-Qaeda, and Rassam did. Rassam he was convinced by somebody in Canada, you know, a cleric, that, you know, he should join the movement. He went and trained in Afghanistan and Pakistan to become a terrorist and came in here. He really didn't know what he's doing, and he's really a good guy at heart. He was just a lost soul. But he was moved by what happened. And it started with when we got involved in the case. You know, we had an interpreter who was afraid of him, which wasn't a good vibe. And but we had in our office Joanne Oliver, who was another one of our assistants who in a prior life got a PhD in French. And so we brought her in to not just help with the case, which she did, but she could talk to Ahmed. And so our conversations were real, but he still didn't trust us. And, you know, they're just things that had to break down. But by the end of the couple of years that we represented him and the relationships we developed and the fairness of the trial that he saw Judge Kuhnauer give, the way even the marshals in this citadel of security treated him, moved him, and he decided that he would cooperate. And he did. At some point he stopped because of the mistreatment he's getting from government lawyers who were interrogating him in New York City. But so he was vilified for that. But he saved hundreds and hundreds of lives because he gave the government information they never had before. They were able to open investigations and do stuff that they wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. So it was a compelling case for those kind of reasons. And we still, Jennifer Davis, our investigator in the case, Mike and I have contact with Ahmed. And I mean, I didn't like his sentence, but right now he's pretty okay with where he is rather than being in immigration detention and threatened with deportation to Algeria, probably, you know. So, and that's just an aside, I guess. But it was a moving case on many, many different human kinds of levels. So
Yeah.
you don't get that, you know, unless you get what we got here, and they're celebrating 50 years of, right? You know, so those moments.
And Mike, other than defeating me in the only case I lost in the Washington State Supreme Court, what was your most
Well,
important case?
Judge, you bring that up frequently, and I couldn't remember the case. So today I did a Google search, Lasnik, Filipovich, Washington Supreme Court, and I looked it up, and it was State versus McKim in 1982, and I had a firearm enhancement taken out of the case. So I wasn't that that big of a case.
Well,
but-
yeah, I'm not holding a grudge.
But, frankly, I don't have like one case that I think was my biggest case or biggest accomplishment. What my memories are of the people, the clients, some of the clients that really stick out over the years. And also the people that I've worked with, the investigators, the paralegals, the social workers, the folks that really did all the hard work to allow the lawyers in our office to have these accomplishments that we could talk about. I mean, we had a death penalty habeas in the case that if it wasn't for the investigator, he would have been executed. And this was like hours before an execution. Investigator who was very diligent and went out and found a piece of evidence that was buried in a storage locker. The other, memories I have are not so happy memories, being there with that same investigator and on the phone with Stacy Brownstein and John Carpenter when one of our clients was executed at the end of the Trump administration. So it's, so there's not just one case, and they're not all wins. There's a lot of losses and failures when you do this work, and you have to have the emotional ability to try to withstand that over the many decades and take some good out of that. So
Sure.
that's what I would say.
Thank you, Mike. How about you, Colin?
Well, I guess two things that kind of bracket what Tom and Mike have been talking about. I mean, in terms of the most complicated and maybe interesting case I had, it would probably be the Operation Pacifier cases, which as some of you don't know, the FBI actually had its own child pornography website up and running for a while, and did remote computer searches via malware in over 100 countries. And our office actually coordinated nationally the defenses on those cases. At one time, we were consulting with and sharing pleadings with about 100 attorneys across the nation. So that was challenging and fascinating, and and got two rulings that I think are fairly unusual from Judge Bryan, who is one of the most wonderful judges to practice in front of. And one is that he dismissed a case under the Classified Information Procedures Act, which I think anecdotally is the only time that that's happened, and also made a finding of outrageous governmental misconduct in running this website. So those are two very gratifying outcomes in a challenging case. But really, the case that I think about the most and is most important to me is one that I actually shared with Judge Evanson's group of students earlier today. And it was actually the very first case that I tried. Well, actually, the second case. The first case I got an acquittal. It was the second case that I tried involving an unhoused man who was charged with burglary. And we had a very difficult working relationship. He did not trust me, was very unhappy about the strategy of the case. Sat through the trial, really not communicating with me, very closed down. And he got convicted. And the jury came back with that guilty verdict. And I'm standing next to him, and I turned to him and I said, "I'm so sorry." And he said, "You have nothing to be sorry about. You're always going to be Perry Mason to me." And what that really brought home was it wasn't the winning or the losing. It was standing up in the representation and speaking for somebody. Even though our relationship had been challenging, I've held on to that really as the guiding success of my practice as a defender.
Wow, that's a great story. Yeah, and it's you and Erwin share New York prosecution, move out west, and conquer the area. Do you think we should only hire people with your and Erwin's background, or should we vary it a little bit?
Well, I don't think the court reporters would be happy about that, because they will still raise their hand and tell me to slow down after all these years. And I think I'm already going at half speed compared to a lot of New Yorkers. So
Yeah.
I don't know about that. But
Yeah. When my wife and I moved out here in 1974, and then my mom moved out a couple of years later. She said, "If your father and I had known about this place, we'd have moved out here 50 years ago, and we'd be the king and queen of Seattle." It was like, this is a different playing field than being in New York City. But a lot of Seattle in this area has changed quite a bit, hasn't it? A lot more sophisticated and picking juries
expensive.
has changed and what have you seen, Tom, over your many decades?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was sort of a big cowboy town when I moved here in
booming
'75. Yeah,
town, right?
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it was real blue collar and redneck in a lot of ways. I mean, it was a Boeing town. You had the engineers, but you had the longshoremen and just kind of
Foresters.
yeah, it was a wide open out west kind of place, but it became a technological hub, and so that vibe has definitely been polished off it. But there's just so much good about being out here that we'll even deal with that. Although I must say, AI is something that certainly drove me out of ever wanting to be a lawyer again. I mean, I don't want to compete against a robot, but but I agree, Judge. It's just kind of a different place here from other places, but also it's different than it was 50 years ago.
Yeah. So, Mike, when you decided not to go for another term as federal defender, and Tom, when you decided not to go, you both left the office. You
Yes.
didn't stick around. Colin, you're going to stick around. Are you going to have any issues? So, not being in charge?
I'm actually not going to be sticking around.
Ooh.
And part of the reason of that is that I cannot stick around. I am actually an employee of the Ninth Circuit. We have a hiring freeze. I suppose that might end by the time my term ends, but I actually would not be able to get around the hiring freeze if I was interested in being an assistant defender again.
Oh, okay.
But at the same time, so that's a hardship that weighed on me quite a bit as I thought about the next move. But I have been here 24 years, and I think it'll be time for some new challenges.
So you could apply to be Judge Cartwright's law clerk if you want.
Now that's a job I would take in a heartbeat.
All right, any last minute, second question from anyone out in the audience? So, okay, Johanna, you want to close it up and ask for a round of applause for our wonderful federal defenders. Yeah.
Well, thank you for such a diverting, enlightening, interesting hour and a half of discussion. As someone who is not from the Seattle area, I came up from San Francisco, it really gives me a window into what kind of a culture of dedication, excellence, and cooperation has been developed over the 50 years of the history of the Federal Defender's Office here in the Western District. Something really to be proud of, and I just am looking forward to seeing what the next, I may not be around in the 50 years, we'll see, but at least for a while, what happens in the next chapters of this illustrious office. So thank you to our wonderful speakers and our excellent moderator for such a great panel discussion. I want to invite all of you to please come downstairs to the jury assembly room.
On second floor,
On the
lobby
on
floor.
The second floor, the lobby floor,
Yeah.
right? So come down to the lobby and then on that side of the building,
Right.
Where we'll be able to continue the conversations together and enjoy the camaraderie that's been created this afternoon. So on behalf of the M. Margaret McEwen Federal Bar Association and the Ninth Judicial Circuit Historical Society, I want to thank you, and I want to ask for one more round of applause.
And let me thank Tony Duck for helping us with the technology, including putting my microphone in. And let me also, for a lot of you have not met our new clerk of court, Josh Lewis. Josh, you want to stand up and give a wave? Josh just started October 1st. He's replacing Ravi Subramanian. Ravi's sticking on to the end of the calendar year to help the transition. But Josh comes to us. He clerked for a district in Pennsylvania. Then he worked at the administrative office where he was staff to the conference executive committee chaired by Chief Judge Jeff Sutton, the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, who raves about Josh, and we're really delighted to have him as our clerk of court. So thank you.
this is actually not for you all in the room, but for those on Zoom who want CLE credit, if you can email Nancy Tenney your bar number and name, she will help take care of that. So, thank you all.
Thank you, Jess.
Downstairs.